I remember I was 19 years old. I was working on the road for the road department in my small hometown village of Chagrin Falls, Ohio, population 4,100. And as we were, working, usually I was one of the seasonal guys, the young kids, the college kids who would come and help, which usually meant there's a hole to dig, you go inside, and somebody else who's a regular will stand on the shovel and watch. But, we kind of got the grunt jobs and whatever, and as we got into our truck for the workday assignments this summer day in July, I remember we were listening to the radio, we were getting ready to go, and across the radio, the city radio that is, came the news flash. Mrs. Henderson reports that there is a lion in Chagrin Falls Park. A lion. The guy driving the truck looked at me, because the only thing that it was exciting that had happened in his or my lifetime was a kid got stuck in the storm drains and had to, get pulled out of there. That was the biggest news we had heard. But the idea that there was a lion in the park, well, we got in the truck and went to see what was going on. Sure enough, there was the police, the game warden had all been called in. They had tasers, they had tranquilizers and rifles, and they were fanning out across the park. And I'll never forget this. As we were looking across the rise, there was a hillside. The sun was still coming up. It was early in the morning. The river is back there, and then suddenly coming up over the rise was the golden mane and, the paws, dark eyes, and the wagging tail of Mr. Timmons' golden retriever. We were so excited about what was going to happen, and then so disappointed in what wasn't. Some stories, some news, it was fake news before fake news was fake news, right? Some news stories just seemed too incredible to believe, too far-fetched, too out there, too way outside the norm. And then some hit us, and it's almost as if the words don't make any sense. We hear them, but we don't want to hear them. That same summer, 19 years of age, I remember I was in church sitting like many of you are right now. It was a beautiful, warm June day. We were just getting up from the postlude of service. I was getting ready to go down to the coffee hour, and somebody, I can't recall who it was, because all I remember, strange the things you remember when things hit you out of the blue, but I just remember what a gorgeous day it was, and this person pulling me aside and urgently saying, "There's been an accident." And Carol S., was found shot, a self-inflicted gunshot wound, down by the river today. She's dead. Now, I had known Carol since my very first day of third grade when I moved into the district. She was my bus buddy. She would tease me. We had to sit together back when girls had cooties and boys were gross. And we would play back and forth, and we saw each other every day for 9 of the next 11 years until we started driving to school. We became a little more distant, saw each other less frequently. But I heard these words, "Carol is dead." I thought, that can't be. This doesn't make any sense. I just had seen her. She worked down at the movie theater, and she just served us popcorn. There's no way what you're telling me is real. And I think as I hear this story about the disciples, Cleopas and this unnamed disciple, walking on the road away from Jerusalem, away from everything that's happened, away from the crucifixion, away from a life of broken dreams and snuffed out hopes for Israel, that maybe their emotions are somewhere in between those two stories. They can't believe it, and they're absolutely crushed by the news. We were just in the upper room with him. We just saw him at the temple, full of fire, overturning the tables, calling people out, casting the money changers away. What do you mean he's dead? And as they're shell-shocked and walking away from Jerusalem, Their world has just been wrung out. Some of you know what that feels like as you get news of tragic things, as you get knocked off your feet from something unexpected. Barbara Brown Taylor, in her book Good Medicine, Gospel Medicine, says, the Emmaus Road is the road you walk when your team is lost. Your candidate's been defeated. Your loved one has died. It's a long road back to an empty house, the piles of unopened mail, to life as usual when you wonder if you can ever live as usual again. And the Christian writer Frederick Buechner goes a little bit further to say that the Emmaus Road is the road we go to when we try and forget. Whatever the world holds, that nothing is sacred, that even the wisest and bravest and loveliest decay and die. And that even the noblest ideas that we as human beings have always in the end seemed to be twisted out of shape by selfish men for selfish reasons. Emmaus, he says, where we go, where these two went, to try and forget about Jesus and the greatest failure of their lives. They're talking about these things. They're talking about their first century Palestine news cycle when this stranger comes up to them. And as they're talking, it's almost like this divine eavesdropping. It's Jesus. We, the reader, know it's Jesus because the text tells us. But he comes up to them and says, what are you guys talking about? Why the long faces? What's going on? And I really would love to know what Cleopas's reaction was, because we know what he says based on the story that's told to us in the gospel, but we don't know how he says it. Is he incredulous? What are you, some country bumpkin? How do you not know what's been going on? Don't you ever hear the news around here? Jesus of Nazareth, read any bells? The great prophet? No? You don't know what I'm talking about? Or is he exasperated? Is he frustrated? Is he just about to lose his patience? We had thought he is the hope of Israel. We had pinned everything on this guy. And now it's game over. Forget it. Now we're walking away from everything, and we don't know where to go next. Now, before we say silly Cleopas and whoever this other unnamed guy is, I wonder, is when we think about these things, we think about just even 1 week in our own news cycle. Indulge me, if you will, for a moment. I mean, if you turn on the news this week, we had SpaceX rocket exploding. We had climate reports of glacial melt over 4 feet, exponentially increased based on what scientists had predicted. Surface levels of the ocean hotter than they've ever been in recorded history. We had a 16-year-old kid go to the wrong door to pick up his younger brother and get shot. A 20-year-old girl driving the wrong driveway and get killed. Another gunshot. 2 Texas cheerleaders. Another gunshot. An Alabama birthday party. Another gun shooting. You got Supreme Court debates, you got trans bills, you got DeSantis and Disney, you got Hunter Biden probes. And you say, oh my gosh, do you have to bring this stuff up in church? I come here to escape that kind of stuff. Yeah, me too. Sometimes I want to walk away from the pain and brokenness in the 24-hour news cycle. Get tired of it. Get overwhelmed. I get worried. I get anxious about the kind of world I'm leaving to my daughters or to their children. Maybe some of you feel that way sometimes too. Maybe some of you know the Emmaus Road better than you think. The road where human struggles, human failures, our broken places, our deepest hurts, our deepest disappointments, where we just want to say, I'm done. I don't know where I'm going next, but I'm not staying in Jerusalem. a place of broken promises and dreams. He's dead. It's over. And this stranger, again, if you read it in the Greek, it's very playful. Parokai, which means stranger, means not of my house, means I don't know you. You're clueless. And they think Jesus, who is, by the way, walking with them in this pain, right in front of them, they can't recognize him, it says, which is a really peculiar passage. What do you mean they can't recognize him? We'll get back to that. And he has the patience just to hear them out. Tell me about it. What are these things that you're hearing? What are these things that are making your heart heavy? What are these things that have you feeling like the world is falling apart? And I am low on hope and high on anxiety. Because it doesn't seem like some of these things can be fixed. Cleopas and his friend tell the stranger. And he begins to tell them, hey, guys, this is my paraphrasing. Jesus is walking them through the scripture as if to say, you know what? Maybe your God is just too darn small, guys. What do you think? God said, oh, so the Romans nailed him up onto a tree and they killed him. So God said, okay, I guess I'm done. I guess that's all I can do. Maybe there's nothing left to play on this record. Jesus say, no. God doesn't give up in our deepest hurts, our deepest disappointments. In fact, though you may not recognize it, God's right there in the middle of it. And the limits that you sometimes see, the places where we fail as human beings, doesn't mean that that's game over. No, it's in those very places of loss, of hurt, and of brokenness that God is our strength. As they continue to walk, it's very powerful to me. He intends to keep going. They've arrived at Emmaus. They're going to go inside. It's getting late. And in that moment, the disciples, Cleopas and his friend, whoever he or she is, even though they're broken and hurting, even though they feel like their world has fallen apart, they say, hey. They show him hospitality. They bring him in. They say, have something to eat. Stay with us. They still are disciplined to be Christ-like, to be present and to show love, compassion, and grace, no matter what they've faced. And it's in that moment where Christ breaks bread and offers it to them that they recognize this has been Jesus all along. I think there's a powerful layer to this just beyond an Easter story, to a church both in the early stages of Luke's audience when Jerusalem had been destroyed, the temple been leveled, the Romans and the Jewish people had gone to war. They had lost so much in terms of national identity, in terms of prosperity, in terms of their sons and daughters and their lives. And yet the message is, wherever two or more of you are gathered, wherever there's even a seed, a mustard seed of hope, there is the risen power of resurrection. There is a God who says, don't ever put a period where God places a comma. There is a God who says, it's not over until God says it's over. And so in the midst of this, they recognize, it says Jesus vanishes, and they run back to Jerusalem to tell the disciples. Now let's get back to something that's a little unusual in this text. What do you mean he vanishes? Hey, Bullwinkle, watch me pull a rabbit out of his hat. I mean, what is going on here? It seems, is this like a magic trick? Jesus vanishes, Star Trek Enterprise kind of thing. He gets beamed up. What's going on here? Now, interestingly, well, maybe not interesting to you. It's kind of interesting to me because I like to nerd out on this kind of stuff. And as I look at it, I read the early church leaders, and they're talking about all these resurrection and Easter stories, and this thing that you come across, whether it's Mary Magdalene in the garden and she thinks Jesus is a gardener, or it's the disciples in John's gospel that are fishing, they hear a voice, Peter says, that's got to be the Lord. He jumps in the water, they come, they gather around the charcoal fire, it's Jesus, but it says, but none of them dared ask him who he was. Well, if you know he's Jesus, then why are you asking? And then this Emmaus Road where they don't recognize him. And so in the early church, a lot of the church leaders thought that Jesus actually, alongside of healing and casting out demons, being able to walk on water, that he was a polymorph, that he could change the shape of his face. They believed in the first and second centuries of the church, it was one of the most common beliefs about the powers of Jesus that he could change his appearance because of some of these texts. Now that's neither necessarily here or there. Whatever reason they couldn't recognize him, I just offer this today. That sometimes you and I, on whatever road of loss or hardship or worry, whatever road of struggle, whatever that Emmaus road is for us, sometimes we get so wrapped up in those news cycles, so wrapped up in fear or being told who we should be afraid of without even knowing a person, that we get spiritually paralyzed and we worry so much that we miss the presence of God in our midst. And we fail to remember the power of resurrection and Easter. And in those places, this Emmaus Road story calls us back home and says, who's really in control of our lives? Where do we really place our hope? Is it in ourselves? We've got a fairly mixed, when I told the confirmands that, I said, we got a fairly mixed track record on how well we do as human beings. And they said, fairly mixed? I said, yeah, you're probably more right than I am. Or is it in God? Is it the belief that we can be better because of who God is in our lives? That we learn what forgiveness and love, compassion and equality, inclusivity, peace are defined not by us, but by Christ in our midst. That's what we're aiming for. So this Easter week, this Earth Day week, this whatever you have been walking through this week, I'd ask you, when Cleopas says, we had hoped that he was the one, what have you hoped for God here and now? And where is the power of Easter in us as we walk through these doors and walk out of them this week? Whatever the world sends us, whatever's in our sphere of a day, to say, God has the last word always. Life has the last word always. And love, in the good news of Christ, has the last word. Amen.